just practicing my piano skills. Obviously need a bit more practice. My name's Martin Richards and I'm the content manager for the DT Hub. Now in today's webinar we're looking all to do with Makey Makey and the programming board, and then looking at how we can align that with Scratch programming. If you haven't seen Makey Makey before, I suggest you find out a bit more about it. And essentially today I've been playing this piano, and obviously you can see there I can make the keys out of 50-cent pieces. And I'm playing it with an online piano. But to tell us more about Makey Makey and how to use this sort of program and this technology, which I think you'll find really exciting and innovative, we've got Jo Klein, all the way from Queensland, and Jo's going to come and talk to us about what she's done in the classroom and really taken to the next level in terms of designing and thinking with Makey Makey. So I'll introduce Jo. Jo from Talara Primary College in Queensland. G'day, Jo.
Hello everybody and welcome to the webinar.
Okay, just take us through it, Jo.
Okay, so a little bit about me and my context. So I'm the e-learning teacher and coach at Talara Primary College, and as you know, on the Sunshine Coast. So my role is really around mentoring and coaching teachers in innovative 21st century practice. I'm also heavily involved with implementing the digital technologies curriculum across the school, and also preparing and getting students and teachers ready for NAPLAN online. I'm also do a lot of work around the school's STEM improvement agenda, run some robotics and some Makers Club, which is where the Makey Makey comes in as well. And I've also done some tutoring at the University of the Sunshine Coast, some sessional tutoring in digital technologies. Last year, I was a Year 6 teacher and the learning coordinator at Brightwater State School. So I'm going to turn my webcam off now and just go into a little bit more about how the Makey Makey actually fits in with the Australian curriculum and that design thinking. So as you know, with the Australian curriculum, it is divided into design technologies and the digital technologies. So the Makey Makey is a really good tool to fit in both the design and digital technologies curriculum. So in the design technologies, it is about that process and production skills. It generally involves students actually investigating and defining, generating and designing, producing, implementing, evaluating and designing a solution to a real-world problem. And this is where the Makey Makey is a great tool to allow students to be creative in that design process. Students also have to be able to collaborate together to come up with those digital solutions. Having a look at the digital technologies curriculum, the designing digital solutions comes into one of those 4 steps. So if we look a little bit closer, when we're talking about the digital technologies, sorry, gone too far, our Year 3 and 4 students should be able to create simple digital solutions using visual programs with algorithms. And this is where Scratch comes into, but also looking at the Makey Makey. Our Year 5s and 6s need to be able to create those digital solutions also using a visual programming, but need to be able to use branching and iteration or repetition. Going up into our upper grades, our 7 and 8s need to move on from the visual programming, so they're not using Scratch anymore, they're using a general purpose programming language. And that can vary depending on the programs, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on as well. So looking at Talara's context, as part of my role, we've put together a STEM roadmap to have a look at where all different digital tools and supports we can put in place to implement the digital technologies curriculum. So having a look at the Makey Makey and Scratch, we've put that into our Year 3s and our Year 5s. So our Year 3 units mainly designed around user input, and the Makey Makey allows for a lot of creativity with that. Our Year 5 students are also using Scratch at a much more complex nature. Moving into our upper grades in our Year 6s, using the Arduinos. At the moment it's only an extension, it's a learning process for us with that as well. And moving into other areas of coding with robotics. So what is a Makey Makey? Basically, a Makey Makey is a circuit board that allows users to connect to everyday objects using alligator clips. The board uses a closed-loop electrical signal to send the computer either a keyboard stroke or a mouse signal. So if we have a look a little bit closer at the actual board, our board at the front uses the up-down arrows, our left and our right. We've also got the space bar and the mouse click. And down the bottom is where we can connect an alligator clip to earth or create our ground to complete our circuit. And generally, we as a person are earthed and become part of that circuit. On the back of our board, it allows us to start getting into a little bit more into that user knowledge. The outputs at the top we can use for our Arduino boards if we were connecting it and going further. Down the bottom, we've got other areas where we can connect our earth, and we also have other mouse clicks, so what's highlighted in green there, and we can connect to other letters over there in the blue. So basically, a Makey Makey works by connecting to an input. So if you have a look in the picture, I've got an input connected to the down arrow, connected to the banana. I'm part of the circuit, so I'm connected to earth, which needs to complete that circuit, and which you can see is connected there by a grey wire. We normally use a black wire to connect the earth, but that's really up to you. We need a conductive material, which in this case is our banana, and then something to activate that key. And here, as I press the banana would complete that action. Just like Martin, when he was playing the piano with the coins, whenever Martin touched the coin was the conductive material, and I was activating that, or he was activating that by pressing on the coin. So, starting off your journey with Makey Makey, where do you start? Generally with my lessons, the first lesson I like to start with just introducing the Makey Makey. How does it work? What does it do? And there's a really good resource on the Digital Technologies Hub that has some great ideas on what you can do here. Basically, I give my students plasticine and get them on to the Makey Makey piano that's online, and the link is there in your notes. Basically, the students connect up the Makey Makey to the plasticine, and then they can play the piano just as Martin was with the coins, and have a bit of a go at that. And once they've had a bit of a play with that, I find students will often say to me, it's not working. And generally that's because one person is holding the earth and another person in the group is trying to press on the plasticine, and they can't understand, well, why isn't it working? So then we start talking about circuits, and we draw that circuit on the board and explain how a circuit actually works and how we need to create a closed circuit. By someone else holding, or someone being earth and someone else tapping on the objects, we actually have an open circuit. So we need to close that circuit. Once students have a bit of a concept around that circuit, we can then start looking at other ways of showing that. So generally at their tables, I get them to hold hands, and so that they create a circuit around the table. When they stop holding hands, they can see that they can no longer press the plasticine and make it work. So basically, the circuit's running around the table group. You can even move on and do that around the whole class. So if you get one student earthed and hold hands with all the students around the class in a circle, and the last person in the line, they're the person that starts tapping the plasticine, they'll be able to activate the online piano. The second lesson I like to do is to get the kids exploring conductivity. What materials are actually conductive with the Makey Makey? So plasticine works really well. Coins work really well. Aluminium foil is fantastic. They can use things like fruit, but getting them to also explore other objects in the room, pencils.
Jo, we've got a question about plasticine or Play-Doh.
Yeah, both will work.
From Sarah. Sarah's saying she's tried plasticine and she says it doesn't work.
Okay, the plasticine that I've been using does, but maybe Yeah, not sure there. I have tried plasticine, just the normal plasticine that you buy. Just make sure that you are, when you're connecting the plasticine, that you are tapping fairly close to where it's connected.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Good question, though.
Thank you. Yeah, good question. So moving on from there, the third lesson that I like to do with kids is to always get them to start creating something and trialling something themselves. So if they are familiar with Scratch, you might want to get them using a sprite just to move up, down, left, right. If they're not familiar with Scratch, you might even want to get them on to one of the online Scratch tutorials, get them to create their own game using the tutorials. We might even want them to go online onto the Scratch MIT website and actually start playing some of the games that are on there already. Or if you've got games that other students in the school have created, or past students, would be a great way for them to explore that. And you can see in the photo on the screen, this particular student is playing a game that was created by a Year 5 student using arrows made out of aluminium foil. So when she taps the up arrow, the sprite will jump on the screen. When she touches down, it will move down and left and right. So just before I go on any further, I want you to think about what sorts of problems or things that you could solve with a Makey Makey. Because the last thing I do at the end of that lesson is ask the kids, what sorts of problems could you solve, and see what they can come up with. So I want you to have a think about, just with your knowledge of Makey Makey now, what sorts of things could you do with a Makey Makey? What problems could you solve? And I'll hand you over to Martin to put up the question.
Okay, so all you need to do now, if you've got some ideas, you can use the question section. If you've got a question, you can use that facility there, the little box there. So while we're waiting for some answers, maybe if we just go through. Okay, we've got one from Sarah. Thanks, Sarah. Her Year 5 students created a dance map. So there you go. So similar idea there from Sarah for Year 5s. Any other ideas we've got? Maybe if we just go through some of the ideas, and I'll let you know when there's some more ones that came through.
Yeah, excellent. All right. So I am working with a Year 5 class only last week, not last week, the week before. I asked them that exact question, and some of the ideas that they came up with. So one of them was to create a floor mat that can be controlled with your feet to play a game for a child with limited hand movement or missing limbs. So instead of controlling it with your hands, they would actually be able to control it with their feet. Another idea was to use a Makey Makey to control a story or a book. So looking at that choose your own adventure path was what they came up with, and as they were learning about safety choices, they were talking about things with Scratch where it could be choices, which would be the safe option, and if they chose this particular object, it would go that way or vice versa. Also looking at creating a controller that could be touched with your nose or your face for somebody in a wheelchair. So for somebody that had very limited mobility, actually being able to control it using other body parts.
Jo, Maury's got a suggestion. He had made a game controller for a game like the Mario, Super Mario that you can get.
Yeah, definitely. And the kids love creating their own controllers for their games that they create. It just adds that little bit of extra element to their game.
I'm just going back to that plane incident. One of the things mentioned here was that because plasticine needs to be water-based and some of the other plasticine's oil-based, so it may not conduct for that reason.
Yes, that could be. That's a very good point to make. Was that from Sarah?
That was from Maury again.
Okay. Thank you. No other ideas coming through there?
We'll move on from that now.
Yep, okay. So some of the other ideas that they came up with, creating a game that teaches you to surf and using a Makey Makey to connect the surfboard. So instead of standing on a real surfboard, you would stand on a surfboard that maybe be covered in aluminium foil or something conductive, so that you would actually be controlling your game via that surfboard. And then ideas like creating board games that could teach about a particular topic. Often with Year 5 students, I find that they tend to then go off track and start thinking about real world problems and how they could be solved, not necessarily being able to be solved with a Makey Makey, but their mind starts exploring. So kids were coming up with ideas around creating virtual worlds where they could explore virtual environments with a Makey Makey. Now, while that's not possible with a Makey Makey, getting them thinking about those sorts of things is really important, because it's that problem, getting them into that problem-solving mindset where we can then go, okay, well, we can't use that, but let's explore and let's find out other things that we could do to solve those problems. So looking at the Makey Makey and the curriculum, obviously our science curriculum, in particular our Year 6 curriculum, with the exploring circuits and the conductive material, Makey Makey is an excellent resource for that particular activity. And it would be great to even add in the different types of plasticine there and get them to try and work out why one's conductive and one's not. Maths, creating a game in maths to teach a skill that's been identified by a class, and I'll give you an example of this shortly. English, creating animations in Scratch and controlling using a Makey Makey controller. So that could be a handheld controller, it could be arrows, it could be any sort of dance mat or a floor mat. Creating a board game using Makey Makey, and often lead is conductive as well, so even having that element in your board game. And then within science, creating plasticine or Play-Doh planets with quiz question cards. And I'll give you some more examples of those as we go through. So looking at some projects that have been done across the 2 schools that I've been working at over the last couple of years. So this particular project was done by some students at Brightwater State School. So in this particular one, Year 6 students were going on a school ski trip. And as only half the students were attending, the Makers Club that I was running decided that they wanted to design a game where kids that weren't attending the ski trip could actually start skiing. So the students here have created their skis. They've put the aluminium foil in the middle of their skis so that they could be activated with the Makey Makey. And basically their game works that when you stand on the left ski, your sprite will move to the left. If you stand on the right, your sprite will move to the right. Quite a challenging game. I think I hit many a tree as I was travelling through the game, but definitely a way that they could do that. These students then went further and wanted to really create that virtual world aspect. While it wasn't possible with what they were doing, they added a little extra element where they took photos, 3D photos while they were on the ski fields, and actually put those on a phone and had those inside the Google cardboard goggles, so that before the kids played the game, they actually sat down, had a look. It looked like they were on the ski field. They sprinkled some fake snow over their head, and then they took off the goggles, and then they were able to play the game that they'd created, their ski trip game. So another idea that I'm exploring and playing with at the moment, so this is my test model that I've been working with kids that we're going to be moving on to something else in Science Week, but it's using Makey Makey and an Ozobot. So with this particular one, it uses a switch to activate the Ozobot. So if you're not familiar with an Ozobot, it's a programmable robot that will follow a black line, and it's colour coded. So you can actually put little colour codes on where the black light is, and you can slightly see a couple on the picture there. And it can make the robot either slow down, go faster, turn left, spin around, do all sorts of different tricks depending on the colour code that you give it. An Ozobot will also work with an app, and you can program it through an app as well. But basically how this works, the switch, the Makey Makey is connected to the aluminium foil, which is connected under the black line there, and you can see that the Ozobot's actually sitting on a little bit of paper. So as it rolls over that paper, it activates the Makey Makey and then creates the story. So with this particular one, as I said, it was a practice one. We were using the Three Little Pigs for the story of the Three Little Pigs. It was one of our BBOT activities, so our sequencing for our maths. The students sequenced the story, and then they've activated, so the big bad wolf, as he goes past the straw house and the brick house, he does the big bad wolf, I'm going to huff and puff and blow your house down. So looking at that idea as curriculum application, so definitely that sequencing stories in early years and getting students to come up with that multimodal element of getting them to get a character to speak. Nice simple coding in Scratch can be done right down even with Year 2 students. You could possibly even do it with Year 1 students. So it's just another way of bringing those multimodal texts into the classroom. It does then allow for a little bit of programming, other ideas you could do with it. And I mean, the ideas are endless. You could create a space board game if you're looking at Year 3 students or Year 5 students, and actually have the Ozobot activate information about different planets as they go over or move through the solar system. You could create informative texts. So instead of creating information about the environment, it could be that the Ozobot goes over it and starts talking to them about whatever the topic is that they've created, or even a board game. One of the projects that I'm exploring, and the reason we have done this model one, is that in the Science Week we were lucky enough to get a $500 grant to purchase some Ozobots. So students in Year 2 and 3 will be reading the book What Does It Mean to Be Green, and then completing an online eco footprint quiz. From there, they're going to work collaboratively to plan ways that they can improve their footprint and be green. So once they've come up with their ideas, they're going to draw those on their butcher's paper, create their story map, and then program the Ozobot to move through their story map. And of course, we're going to add in those switches so that as they go past each of those elements, then our sprite on our screen is going to talk about a little bit more detail about how they can be green, because the topic is Future Earth. So another idea, this is another one that's a work in progress with students, so I didn't have a final picture as I was on leave in the last week of school, but some Year 5 students are working on a science space game. The students that were actually doing this were an extension group, so the teacher came to me with these students and said, look, they have to create some information about space, but she wanted them to be able to do something a little bit more interactive than just a PowerPoint. So we came up with the idea, okay, they're going to create a space game in Scratch, and with that they're going to make plasticine or Play-Doh models of the different planets and have user input. So when the character on the screen asks a question, because the planets are connected with the Makey Makey, the user or the player has to select what planet is the correct planet to answer the question. So you can see there one of the questions, which is the only planet known to have liquid water. The students have then put in an if then else statement. So if the space key is pressed, then it will say, well done, Earth is the only planet with liquid water. So they would actually connect their space key on their Makey Makey to their Earth. With the else, if they touch any other planet, it's going to say wrong answer, Earth has water.
really good activity for culminating days or parent workshops, as parents can actually have a bit of a explore with that and have a go at creating or playing the games that students have created. That idea, though, you can use for any subject. It could be matter, so you could be learning about solids, liquids and gases and create a game on solids, liquids and gases. It could be heat in Year 3. Our students in Year 3 will be doing that next term, as they have to create their Scratch game for the Digital Technologies unit, and we wanted it to be more STEM related rather than just a C2C unit. So basically they're creating a game very similar to this with that user input that would actually ask questions about heat to link to their science unit. So moving on to another project, this was done by a group of students in the Makers Club, but a group that were also on the Student Council. So the students had been collecting rubbish at the school and had been going around and informing classes on what could be recycled and what couldn't be recycled. And they collected rubbish before they did that, and they collected rubbish after. And they found that it really wasn't making a huge impact on students' knowledge of what could be recycled and what couldn't. So the students decided that they were going to create a recycling buddy. So with this, their recycling buddy, the computer actually is the head of their recycling buddy. So using Scratch, they programmed their face to actually give information about what could be recycled and what couldn't. So you can see there that the board that they've created has a whole lot of different materials that could possibly be thrown into the bin. When those materials are touched, it activates the face on the screen and it starts talking about what could be and couldn't be recycled. So going back to the Australian curriculum and how that fits in, so in that investigating and defining, the students actually identified a school need and decided to solve a problem through that design creation. They then had to generate and design their creation. So they did some visual planning of what it was going to look like. They constantly had to collaborate together because it was a joint project. They then had to write their program in Scratch, produce their final product, create it, design it, evaluate it. Was it effective? Was it not effective? And actually then shared that with younger grades. It's a way of informing others or having an interactive display to inform others of what could and couldn't be recycled. Another project, this one was done at Brightwater State School as part of the Young Entrepreneurs of the Future grant. So Brightwater was lucky to be successful in obtaining that grant. We didn't use a Makey Makey as such, it was only done through Scratch, but on reflection now and after we finished, it's certainly one that you could use a Makey Makey with, and one that I would actually use a Makey Makey with if I was to do it again. So with this particular project, students analysed the previous NAPLAN year's data to look for weaknesses across the school. So they actually sat the test themselves and they correlated that data with the school-wide data and had a look at the national averages and what were the questions that the school was doing poorly in. The students then looked a lot deeper into those questions, and we talked a lot about, well, what could the misconceptions be for those questions? Why are students getting those wrong? So then the idea was to collaboratively come up with a solution that could teach other students how to solve that problem. So the students had to then really start breaking that problem down into manageable steps in order to solve it. And that's where that computational thinking comes in. We then looked at Scratch. A lot of these Year 4 students had never used Scratch before. The Digital Technologies was in its first year. They weren't involved with Scratch in the previous year, so this was their first opportunity to have a play with it. We did a lot of unplugged activities, and you can see an example there where we actually used lookalike Scratch blocks in order to create code and get them thinking about how they can actually create those algorithms before putting it into Scratch. We did some pre-test data and some post-test data, both on the digital technologies and on their NAPLAN data. And you can see by the graphs there was huge improvement in the students' understanding of the digital technologies, but also we're talking about our extension students, so our high-end kids, our kids that are really working in the top 2 bands already, but we saw great improvement there as well. Those games actually then became part of a presentation for other students to use in the following year in order to teach them the concepts that were identified as being a school need. On my reflections there, I've put that it would actually be a great activity to do with a Makey Makey, and getting the kids to create a handheld controller for their game, or actually creating some interactive games, so board games that could be used in the classroom that still use a Makey Makey and a computer, still have that multimodal element to it, that can actually still teach those concepts, would probably be even more valuable and allow for a lot more creativity than the project actually enabled by just creating a game in Scratch. And this idea could even be extended up into that high school and go into that advanced C+ coding or Python coding as well, so the concept behind that. Also looking at that as a concept, it doesn't need to be an extension group of kids. It could be a maths test that you do in your class. You might conduct a maths test and have a look at the data with the kids and go, okay, these are the questions that as a class we don't do really well with, or this is our class's goal to improve number lines, for instance. So then getting the kids to create games that can teach others about that concept that's being identified. So the idea can be transferred across a lot of classroom situations. The next example isn't a Makey Makey either. However, I strongly believe it's important because teaching students to code and to use that problem-solving nature and solve problems, find solutions, starts in the early years. We need to be encouraging that very early on. So even in the P2, students have to be able to follow, describe, and represent a sequence of steps and decisions, so our algorithms, needed to solve simple problems. So getting students to create animations in Scratch in the early years is fundamental for them to be able to move into that year 3 and 4 and move into Scratch and actually have some background knowledge of Scratch. Once they've got that background knowledge, we're not spending our time teaching them the skills in Scratch, but more allowing them to explore and come up with some really fantastic solutions to problems. And definitely even into the 5s and 6s as well, and right up into our high school. If we can build those skills from very early on, we are setting our students up for success in being able to solve problems. And Scratch Junior really allows for great storytelling, animations. The kids thoroughly enjoy playing around with Scratch. Great little multimodal activity for them. Okay, so having a look here, what other ideas do you have for integrating Makey Makey into the curriculum? Because I'd love to hear from you guys after hearing some of the examples that I've given you, whether you've got any others.
So obviously if you can use that, the questions facility again, just add in some of your ideas. So the question is, what other ideas do you have for integrating Makey Makey into the curriculum? We've had some really good ideas from Sarah and Maury. Maury's got another one. He's got a question, does Scratch Junior work on Chromebooks? I'm not sure if you know the answer to that one, Jo.
Oh, to be honest, I haven't checked. I've only ever used it on an iPad, but I do believe it is only an iPad app, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. And Michelle thinks it's only iPad.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's
I'm pretty sure.
iTunes, so that would indicate it's for iPad only. There's a question here.
Yeah.
There's a question here from Helen. Is Scratch or Scratch Junior best for years 4 who have not coded yet? I just answer that. I would think. Go for it.
Yeah, no, I was going to say by year 4, they really need to be using Scratch.
Yeah,
in order for them to move on by the time they get to year 7, they need to be doing Scratch.
Yeah. Wayne's had an idea
to
about...
really enable the user input.
Sorry, Jo. Wayne's had an idea, they're coming thick and fast. Simulations for solar system, planets, orbits, or moon phases. That's for Makey Makey suggestion.
Yes.
Also...
Yeah, I'm picturing a moon phases. I think that'd be a fantastic little project.
Yeah. Michelle said there's also other great visual coding apps, basically Tinker and Pyonky, Pyonke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, there's so many different coding apps. It's finding what works for your school and the resources that you have at your school, and then making sure that they are actually being used in the curriculum, and not just as an outside either. Making sure that they're being used to link to what you're doing in class in other subject areas.
Good idea. Shelley's got an idea. She's saying it'd be cool to explore connecting the new Google explorations with Scratch plus Makey Makey. So use an artifact and connect to an exploration.
Okay, yep.
I'm not familiar
Like
with
to know a bit more about that idea.
I'll go and find out about that. What else we got? Okay, so Helen's got Makey Makey Go. I would like the larger Makey Makey. Where's the best place to purchase? Where did you get yours from?
Now you put me on the spot. I've actually purchased them from a few different places, and I'm just trying to think of the main Modern Teaching Aids.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's where we got our last kit from, to be honest. And we did buy the education kit, so it had a pack of 10. Came with tape, conductive tape.
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed that.
Okay. It's all right. Some questions coming thick and fast trying to keep up with. If you're in South Australia, you can borrow Makey kits from University of Adelaide, so the CCR. Good point, Kathy. Thank you.
Yes. Yep. And if you haven't explored the CSER resources and the MOOC, strongly recommend that you do that. And there's the representatives now that are based all over the place that can come out to the school and do some workshops around that as well. But also looking at those online resources are fantastic. And they do have that borrowing library as well.
Well, good. One question here is, Jo, is your STEM roadmap available as a live document so I can look at the links? I'll just say there that I did, we have put up the PowerPoint in the handouts, but maybe Jo can answer that one about the STEM roadmap you've got.
Look, we've shared the STEM roadmap with other schools in our region as well, so I'm more than happy to share that with you. Obviously, it's a draft. We edit it all the time as we make changes. We'll be editing it soon for the design technologies and having a look at that. But my email's also on the slides, so if you want to email me, I'm more than happy to send you out a copy of that so that you can actually modify it and make it your own.
There's Michelle's got a question, another idea. What about making interactive word problem posters? Makey to interact with multiple choice questions, logical sequences in Scratch, as it could be a holiday project.
Yeah, that sounds great. Look, I was telling Martin about it the other day. Once you really start getting into it, you really start becoming quite creative in it. And the other night, I just had this brainwave, and when I wonder whether you could use glasses, so I started Googling Makey Makey and glasses, and I saw an example somewhere, a picture of these glasses. So I created a pair of glasses with, you know, the aluminium stars, like the sequence stars. So I hot glue gunned 3 stars on one side of the $2 3D glasses from the Cinnamons, and then 4 stars on the other side, and then connected it up to the Makey Makey, and I actually hung the aluminium foil around my neck. So I had one of the lanyards covered in aluminium foil so that I could earth myself, and I could control the game. So I was just playing games on Scratch at that time, but I could actually control the games by pressing on the aluminium stars on the glasses. So I think my husband had thought I'd gone completely mad by this stage when he walked into the bedroom, and here I am connected with all these wires to my glasses to a computer. But certainly once you get started, the ideas will really start flowing, and you'll find the kids' ideas, they will come up with the most amazing things, and you will sit there and go, oh my, I've never thought of that.
Well, that all sounds good. I wish we had a photograph, Jo, just to have that as a, you know, something we could look at.
I was actually thinking, I actually do have them at home too. I should have taken a photo and put it on the slide.
I think in the remaining time, maybe if we move on to, I think we've exhausted our ideas. So thanks everyone for.
Yeah, we'll go. Keep going. Yeah. So I suppose for the last couple of slides, just looking at going further. So once your students are experts and at Scratch, this might be in those upper years. In years 5 and 6, you might find that they are on Scratch a lot at home and they need to go further, or you're wanting those extension programs for your kids. It might even be that you're in year 7 or 8 and you're looking beyond that visual block coding. So moving forward with Arduino. So again, I'm going to link you back there to the Digital Technologies Hub. I went exploring earlier, and on the Digital Technologies Hub, there is a half-an-hour video tutorial that goes through Arduino in quite a lot of detail. So it starts talking about, well, what is an Arduino? And a Makey Makey actually is a simple Arduino board. It starts then talking about the software and how you can connect that, and it gives you a whole lot of projects that you can actually do with yourself or even with your students that will actually teach you how to do that. So you can see in the picture there that picture. Yeah.
Could you just go to the next slide for us? We're still on the question. Yep.
Oh, I have switched over.
Okay.
I'll go back and try again.
Yep.
We got the new slide now?
Not yet.
Still not there?
No, but maybe just keep talking and
I might just keep talking, and yeah, it will be on the notes as well if you can't see it there on the screen.
And also, you can download the version. So just in terms of time, we might just keep it going.
Keep going, that's right. So with that Arduino and those programs, there are some excellent projects that you can actually work through. And I do challenge you that if you're not an expert, if you don't know anything about it, don't be frightened to learn with your students. Try it with them. I often will walk into a classroom with a group of kids and go, okay, I've never done this before, but let's do it together. And with the kids, you can learn from them, and also they'll learn from you as well as you work through that together. But also, if you are looking at that in those upper years and into the year 7 and year 8, the actual designing a solution stays the same. So students have to investigate and define, generate and design their idea, produce their product and implement that. They then have to evaluate, and obviously over that whole process, they're collaborating together. Don't get kids to come up with solutions on their own, make them work with a group. When students actually have to work with a group, they get a lot more out of it. They learn from each other. They have to problem solve. They have to communicate. And really, they're learning those skills that they need for the work. I'm going to spot slides, and I'm hoping it's coming up for you. But on the next slide, if you are going back and referring to the notes, even going further with an Arduino, I've put a link there to Spark Fun. It has a great advanced guide for you to install and add on to the IDE software that comes with, or that you download for the Arduino, that allows you to connect the Makey Makey to that. So there's information there on how to download that software, but there's also information and links to that how-to guide if you are wanting to go further than just a Makey Makey. These couple on the last slide that I've got there, I haven't had a chance to explore them in detail yet, but I've included them both here because I've come across them in my travels with my playing around with things. One is called Scratch for Arduino. It is an interface and simple block programming for the Arduino, and uses the boards and allows you to connect sensors. So it's kind of that in between Scratch and the Arduino IDE software. There's another one that I found as well called KittenBot. I've downloaded it, but I haven't had a chance to really explore it either. It uses a 3.0 version of Scratch, where you can connect an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi or different robots that you can actually buy through them, and you can control them with sensors. And the great thing about this one is it actually converts the block coding into that C+ programming. So if you're looking at students in 7 and 8, it can help bridge that gap. But like I said, I haven't had a chance to explore them fully, so I would probably advise you to explore those, get your head around those programs before you did those with your students. So I'm going to finish off just with some key learnings from my experiences. For starters, a Makey Makey is a fantastic, cheap tool to begin designing solutions with kids. It is a really great starting point, especially when Scratch comes so much into, well, it's not purely the digital technologies curriculum, but allows for that visual block coding in those years 3 to 5 area. Next thing, a whole school approach is important. And honestly, that roadmap that someone was asking about before, that was vital in us setting up at the very beginning of the year, having a look at our program, having a look at the resources that we had, budgeting around, okay, well, this is what we need, this is how we're linking it to the curriculum, this is where it's starting in the early years, and this is where it's going right up to our year 6, and putting that together. So without that roadmap, we really wouldn't have what we need in order to put that STEM agenda in place. Next year I've got think big, but start small. And Makey Makey is a great place to start, because you can begin your learning journey with your students in a very simple way. The online piano is a fantastic resource just to start, get your head around how does a Makey Makey work. Allow students the opportunity to explore, think critically and creatively, and collaborate with each other. And I talked about that before. Get them talking, working in groups. They need to be playing around with things, challenging each other, and talking about those design solutions. Again, you don't need to be the expert. Be the person that guides the students and allows them to explore. Let them be the teacher. Let them teach you. I learn things off my students all the time. They blow me away with their knowledge. Kids will go home after a lesson on Scratch. I had one student last year that we were doing some work on Scratch. She went home, went on and started teaching herself Python because she just loved it. And she would come to school and she would be my go-to. If I got stuck, I'd be calling her over and go, come and help me. She loves that. She loved that she could be helpful, and I learned a lot from her. And finally there, with your maker's environment, it doesn't need to be a physical space, it's what you make it. So it's about having a culture of solving problems and designing solutions. It doesn't need to be a really expensive space. You need to have a look at what tools you would like and then start looking at, okay, well, how can I make them work in my school, in my setting for my kids? And that's me done.
Okay, well thanks Jo. If you put your webcam back on so we can say goodbye, but I'm sure everyone will be so...
I'm just turning my light on.
Yeah, with the amount of ideas that you've given us and just the way you stepped through, you know, the design process I thought was really impressive. And, you know, it's great to hear someone who's been doing this activities for quite some time. I know you were teaching at another school and then came across to your new school and have started that whole process off again. But, you know, through the webinar, people have been saying they've really enjoyed the amount of ideas you've given them. And one of the things I did mention that we hopefully get some of the ideas that you've presented written up so they could take them away and use them in their classrooms. But you know, I think it's a great starting point. Really, as you said, Makey Makey, there's so many different things you can do with it. There's the kids space that come up with whole new ideas. You know, so I think just get it, try and, if you haven't bought one already.
Absolutely, they'll blow you away with your idea.
Yeah, so again, thanks Jo, and I really appreciate the time and effort you've given us. And you know, the recording of the webinar will be on the DT Hub in about 2 or 3 weeks. If you haven't seen the one with Tim Bell and the coding and Scratch, I suggest you go and have a look at that one. And also, if you look at some of the resources that are on the DT Hub to do with Makey Makey, if you just do a quick search on that, or if you're into Arduino, as Jo was mentioning, I think that would be a great way to start. So again, thank you for attending. And Jo, thanks once again for all of your insights. It's been absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. And look, if there is anyone watching that does want any more information or wants to send me a question, feel free. I'm more than happy to answer those.
Okay, fantastic.
Thank you.
We can touch soon. See you. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.